So, as promised, this is the second part of basically what I was talking about um, in the previous video regarding what Nishan asked. And there's an overall point I want to make. He mentioned that when the punch is aimed at the shoulder, I can deflect it. I can shoulder roll. If it's aimed at the head, it's more difficult, harder to make it work. The thing about this is that it's it's not just the fact that somebody is aiming at your face instead of at your shoulder. It's also the fact that you are working with different kind of impact. What do I mean by that? um, Impact changes everything. If you've ever done point sparring, you know the difference between that and full contact fighting. And again, nothing against point sparring. It's just a different kind of sport in the combat sports world. I did one competition and like that, and point fighting, and I I knocked the guy out. Anyway, that's another story. But the point is that when you do point fighting, you have to have a certain measure of control. And again, we can get into the why that sometimes doesn't work out, and how some competitions start that way and escalate. Different topic. But when you do point fighting, you have to have a measure of control. When you do full contact fighting, you have to have a different kind of control. Not no control, but you're allowed to strike full force. If you do so without control of your techniques, you're not going to win the fight. Or very quickly you will run into people who do have control over the techniques, and they will beat you. The difference is the level of impact. Point fighting, you make contact, not that hard. It might not be fun to take a roundhouse kick to the face when it's a snap kick and the guy tags you. It's not the same thing as have like a Muay Thai high kick landing full force, trying to separate your head from your body, with the hip fully driving through and so on. It's different kind of impact. This is one of the hardest things to work with when you start training, is to understand that the drilling that you do, the training that you do, is supposed to bring you to the point where you can handle that kind of impact. What that means is that if you train in such a way that you discount that reality, and a good coach will not let you get away with that, is if you train in such a way as if impact doesn't make a difference, like I'm just not hitting all that hard, and I can throw my right hook a certain way, but when I want to throw it full force, full power, and hit somebody and knock them out with it, and I imagine that there's no difference between these two different levels of impact, you're fooling yourself. What does that mean? A few examples. I often have that with beginning students, is that, for instance, they throw a cross and they tend to lean forward to reach for the target, which makes them ending up in an off-balance position. But also, this leaves them open to counters, because they will be forced to take more time to retract that punch and regain their fighting stance, because they're overcommitted. Now, what I tell them often is that the only reason that you're able to do this is because we're training and there's no consequences. For instance, we do pad training, and when they practice that cross, and I tell them, the only reason you're not falling forward is because A, you're not hitting all that hard, and B, the target is stationary, it's not moving. I'm just giving you the pad and you can hit it, and these are idealized circumstances for you to train. But if you try that cross the same way you're doing it right now, going fast and trying to hit somebody when you're sparring, it's either not going to work because he sees it coming and your head is going to be too close into his range. He can pop out the jab and tag you before you get him. B, if you do manage to throw it all the way to the end, you are more than likely going to fall forward into him and be off balance. Why? Because your technique is not good. Your technique doesn't take into account how things change, how the dynamics and the physics change once you increase the impact level, once you hit really hard and fast and try to land the punch, as opposed to practice it by doing shadow boxing, working with the pads, working with the partners, holding up his gloves, and so on. A good example of that recently, John Jones versus Cyril Gane. Cyril threw a left straight. He missed, and you can see him stepping forward with his back leg. Why? Because he was off balance. Now, it's not that he's a bad striker, obviously, and again, I've got my MMA Formula channel, which talks about MMA, but we're Nishan is talking combat sports, so I stick to that realm. But that is a prime example, is if you do that in training, on the pads, on the heavy bag, you typically don't, there's no consequences. If you do it in a real fight, what happened next? Jones took him down and beat him very quickly afterwards. So when you make these kind of mistakes, they tend to eventually cost you the fight, or cost you that you're going to get hit in the face and so on, and be punished for it. So a key element, and this is hard to do, but this is something that I try to drill into my students, is like, look, when you shadow box, when you work with a partner who's holding the pads for you or the gloves to make light contact, when you're actually doing attack and defense with a partner for real, let's say you're practicing a combination, jab, cross, switch, knee, and he has to parry and then block the incoming knee, whether you're going full force on the heavy bag or when you're sparring quick and light and so on, it doesn't matter. In all of these circumstances, your technique has to be the way it is when you throw it full force, full power. The only difference is the speed and impact level of your technique. What that means is that if you just throw your right cross in a very nonchalant, relaxed manner, just leaning forward a little bit, and maybe even your back foot comes off the floor a little bit as you land, as you finish the punch. If you then think that when you drill that in all the time in the lighter versions of your training, and then you go sparring or you're going to hit hard, and if you think that that is not going to mess up your technique, that just magically you will do the correct technique once you train hard, once you hit hard, you're delusional. Okay, the old adage, you fight the way you train, is true. You don't just magically get better at doing techniques when it really counts if you don't focus on trying the technique correctly every single time in training. Yes, you'll make mistakes and you have to get corrections. Oh, everybody does. It's not the point. The point is that whatever way you are training in your class or in your gym, you have to try to do the technique as if you were going to throw it full force, full speed at somebody. The only difference is the speed at which you do it and the impact that you're trying to generate. That is cranked down. The example that I always give students is that, look, listen to music on your phone, on the radio, whatever. If you dial the volume all the way down, the song sounds a certain way. If you dial it much, much higher, you dial the volume up, it should still be the same song, the same quality of music, just louder. Your punch should be the same way. If you put the volume quietly on the music and it sounds great, but once you crank it up a little bit and then it sounds like crap, there's something wrong with that song. Well, there's something wrong with your technique if you can do it relaxed and light in a way that is not functional, that when you try to do that full force, full power, it doesn't work, and you don't recognize that this is a failing of you as a combat sports athlete, then I think you're going to be in a world of trouble eventually, because somebody will use that against you. So the purpose is to have a uniformity of training and a uniform standard for techniques. Okay, let's say the jab, you throw the jab. Okay, well, you want to have your other hand, your non-striking hand, in a defensive position. Whether it's to the side of the face, in front of the face, anywhere else, I don't care. But there needs to be a reason where that hand is, as opposed to flailing all the way back or down. You want to have a uniform way of how do you retract your jab. Well, typically we don't like to drop the hand. We try to retract it very quickly so you can protect our face again. Doesn't mean you never lower your hand when you jab, but that is not the standard way. Your standard way is going to put you in a position where you have the most advantages. The variations will come with different risk and reward benefits that you have to weigh against the moment that you need them. So having this uniformity means that even when you crank it up intensity wise, the impact goes way up, that you're still throwing it the same way. You just did it faster and you fired your muscle fibers a little bit harder. You contracted your muscles harder to create a harder impact, but the technique didn't change. That is, I think, the key. And I think that is one of the most important aspects of making your style or your training or techniques effective, is that you don't have different modes of training, technically speaking. You can emphasize different things. You can focus on specific aspects of whatever technique you're working on, or if the drill has specific requirements, the drill that you're doing. Or when you're sparring light, you maybe don't want to hit the guy all out. But what you don't want to do is have, when I'm training light, this is how I train my technique. When I'm training full force, full contact, full power, full speed, everything's on, I have a totally different way of throwing the technique. That doesn't work, because you cannot tell your brain to, when you're in an actual fight, say like, okay, only do that way, where you maybe have spent a lot of time training the first way, and that is what is ingrained. So you don't want to have conflicting information in your brain. You don't want to drill in conflicting ways of throwing a technique. There's one standard. This is how I do the technique. Again, I'm not talking about variations. Yes, variations exist. The variations also have their own uniform standard. This is how I throw a stiff jab. This is how I throw an up jab. This is how I throw a double jab, and so on. There's a standard way of doing things. And then the variations can have variations as well. So this branches out tremendously, and then you develop skill. But it is always a conscious choice. This is, you want to do it a certain way. You want to make sure that you calculate that risk-reward ratio, and that when you do an up jab, that it doesn't leave you wide open for a counter, because you just throw it in a general direction going up and you hope that it lands. No. There needs to be a reason why, and the details matter. Just yesterday in MMA class, I was explaining this to one of my students, is that, look, you have to be careful how you retract that right hand after you throw the punch if you want to follow up with a leg kick, because you will expose yourself to a counter. He was swinging it down and back up again instead of throwing the right hand and then bringing it straight back to the face. I said, look, it's not wrong that you're doing, but it exposes you to a potential counter. And why is that important? Well, what is one of the easiest ways to counter a leg kick? Step in and throw a straight punch at somebody's face. It's one of the easiest ways to counter, and consistently works well. You might eat that leg kick for a little bit, but he gets punched in the face. Who gets the better deal? Not not him. So when we practice a right punch followed by a leg kick, what we practice is correctly retracting that fist towards the head, so you can cover up or even parry or catch that incoming counter punch. Can he throw something else? Yes, but one of the most likely counters is somebody punches through your leg kick and tries to punch you in the face. Well, if you start by always having your hand in position after you throw a right straight, you're in a good spot to defend yourself. That is what I mean with a standard. Doesn't mean it's the only way to retract that hand. What it means is that is a standard way that puts you in a best practices situation, which is, if you're in a business environment, best practices is something you understand. There's no reason why we can't have that in combat sports and in martial arts. Anyway, long explanation. I hope this one was useful as well. As always, keep the questions coming. Okay, take care, guys. Bye.